Thank you for joining us today. My name is Erin and I work in the membership team at Diabetes Australia. Today we are joined by accredited exercise physiologist Isabel Lee, for her presentation, Moving Towards Better Health with Exercise. I will now read the Acknowledgement of Country. Diabetes Australia acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional owners and custodians of this country. We pay the utmost respect to them, their cultures and their elders, past and present. We extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that may be here today. Diabetes Australia is committed to improving health outcomes for all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people affected by diabetes and those at risk. I'll hand over to you now, Isabel.
Thank you, Erin. I will just share the presentation. Can everyone see the screen okay now? Okay. Awesome. So, as Erin said, my name is Isabel and welcome to today's membership presentation on moving towards better health. My name is Isabel and I'll be your presenter for today. So a little bit about me, I'm one of the health professionals here at Diabetes Australia and I have a background in exercise physiology, also known as EP. So a lot of EPs, including myself, like to refer to ourselves as doctors of exercise because our job is to prescribe exercise as medicine. So we use exercise as a tool to improve your overall health and well-being. So that's what we'll be focusing on today. So by the end of today, you will have a comprehensive overview of what the physical activity guidelines are. You'll gain a better understanding of the effects of exercise on your health, and then we'll finish off with some considerations that you should be aware of, particularly when you live with diabetes. Essentially, we're going to workshop your own exercise program so that it's relevant to you. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. So if something comes to mind, just write it down so you can ask it later on, or as Erin mentioned, click on the Q&A or the chat box and pop it in there. And so we'll get started with the rest of the presentation. So I wanted to start off today by asking, why do you move? Why is it important for you to exercise? And what value does it add to your life? So I'll give you a little moment to have a think about, why is it important for you to exercise within your life? So by reflecting on your reasons to exercise, essentially it provides you with an anchor for your exercise program. So the decisions that you make regarding what type of exercise you do, how much exercise you do, are essentially determined by your why or your goal, a personal and relevant purpose to your program. The next thing I want you to think about is, how much exercise do you currently do? So what are the activities that you do? How long do you do it for? So the duration and the frequency. So how often are you doing that? So now that you've had a think about what your physical activity levels are, let's see how you stack up against the recommendations. So based on the current research, this is the amount of exercise that is recommended to improve your overall health and well-being, as it decreases your risk of early death by preserving how much muscles you have, so that way you can maintain your independence as you age, so in the long term. And it reduces the development and the progression of conditions such as diabetes. If there's one thing that you remember from today, it would be this presentation slide here. So as the presentation slide reads, it's 150 to 300 minutes per week of moderate intensity aerobic exercise, or 75 to 150 minutes per week of vigorous intensity aerobic exercise, as well as resistance training of a moderate or greater intensity involving major muscle groups on 2 or more days of the week. So we'll get into the specifics later on the presentation. But to summarize, aerobic exercise is any sort of activity where you're breathing a little bit heavier, your heart is beating a little bit faster. So essentially your heart, your lungs, and your blood vessels are working together to sustain an activity for an extended period of time. Resistance training, on the other hand, you may know it better as strength training or weight training, is essentially how much force your muscles can produce. And it is often used to measure how strong you are, so your strength. Ultimately, the long-term goal is to get you as close to or in line with these recommendations to improve your overall health across a range of conditions, including obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetes, as I mentioned. It's important to remember, though, that these are recommendations and guidelines, and it doesn't consider what your personal circumstance or what your current fitness levels are, which is why we started off with, what are you currently doing? How much are you currently doing? Because it's important then to identify your starting point, and then we can individualize your program from there. So how does this directly relate to your diabetes management? Let's briefly recap what diabetes is. So diabetes is characterized by an increased blood sugar level over a long period of time. This essentially impacts how our body can use sugar as energy. You may have heard the sugar referred to as glucose. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to refer to glucose as sugar for simplicity. So because it impacts how our body can use sugar as energy throughout the body, it leads to a whole host of complications relating to our heart, our blood vessels, our kidneys, our nerves, our brains, and our eyes, pretty much our entire body. Because one, the body can either not produce insulin, the chemical messenger responsible for lowering our blood sugar after a meal, or the body doesn't respond very well to insulin. So respectively, this is known as type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So why should we exercise in the first place? When you exercise, your body, in particular your muscles, will use up some of that sugar floating around the body as energy to keep up with the demand of the activity or the exercise that you're performing. Exercise can also help to lower your blood sugar levels by storing some of that sugar in the muscles, the livers, and other tissues, particularly as they get bigger and stronger, almost like a sponge in water. So it's soaking up all that water. In this case, it's soaking up all that sugar. The muscles can also take up sugar through a different pathway without the need for insulin. So even without insulin, the muscles have a different almost transporter to bring in the sugar from the blood into the muscles. On that note, your body starts to become a bit more sensitive and responsive to insulin, essentially reversing that impact of what we call insulin resistance. So in the earlier slide, I mentioned that the body doesn't respond very well to insulin. That is known as insulin resistance. You will also become stronger, you'll become fitter, so your body gets better at delivering oxygen and energy throughout the body, which correlates to that reduced risk of death and disease development and progression. Exercise can also improve your body composition by increasing your muscle mass and reducing your fat mass. So from a health perspective, the goal of an exercise program is to increase your strength, it's to grow your muscles, and it's to get you fitter so that you can maintain a normal blood sugar level to prevent complications from developing or if the complications do occur, prevent them from progressing. So we can increase our muscular strength and our muscle size primarily through resistance exercise. So just to recap, the recommendations or the guidelines for resistance exercise include 2 to 3 times per week of moderate or greater intensity exercise involving the major muscle groups. So the types of exercises you engage in will often be determined by what you prefer to do, what your current strength levels are, and what equipment you have available to you. So to ensure we target all the major muscle groups, exercises can be categorized into upper, lower, and core. So with the upper body, it can be divided into pushing or pulling movements. So classic examples here would be a push-up, pulling would be a row, for example. The lower body can be divided into a squat or lunge pattern. So exercises that are working on bending the knee primarily, or a hinge pattern. So exercises working on bending at the hips a bit more. And the last category here is our core. So essentially that midsection or your trunk area that holds everything together. So your core can either bend, it can flex, it can rotate side to side, or it can resist movement. So by choosing one movement from each category, you essentially cover your entire body. And if you divide that into the subcategories which are listed on the screen there, across the 2 to 3 days, as per the guidelines, you're covering your entire body. So by structuring it this way, or by thinking about the different movements in the different parts of the body, this allows for variation within your program. So it exposes your body to different movements within a controlled environment in a controlled manner, which helps with injury prevention in the long term as well. There are a ton of other exercises, I must say, that don't exactly fit into any of these categories, mainly because they work smaller muscle groups or they're smaller movements. And we often refer to these exercises as accessories because they supplement these main movements here. So you can do them if you prefer or you enjoy doing it, or if it helps you move towards your goal. But categorizing exercises as shown on the screen gives you a good starting point for the resistance exercise part of the guidelines. The second part of that guideline for resistance training reads that exercise should be performed at a moderate or greater intensity. So this can be determined by something called the rate of perceived exertion scale. I will refer it today as the RPE scale. Essentially what it means is how hard did you find that exercise? Or how much effort did you need to put in to perform that exercise? So this scale runs from 1 to 10, 1 being very minimal effort, you can do it all day. It's probably the same amount of effort as you sitting on your chair right now. 10 being absolute maximal effort, meaning if you were to try and perform another repetition of that exercise, I do realize at the bottom, the end of that scale, it says 1, but the 0 is underneath, but it's 10. So if you were to try and perform another repetition of that exercise, you essentially wouldn't be able to. An easy way to remember this is, was the exercise easy, medium, or hard? So as you move down the scale, so as the ratings get higher, it actually matches quite nicely with how many more repetitions could you have performed. So for example, if you are performing a squat and it gets really difficult towards the end and you feel like you could have squeezed out one more repetition, that would be classified as an RPE 9. So 9 plus 1 equals 10. So it adds up quite nicely. If you're commencing an exercise program for the first time, or you're coming back from an injury, or you've had a really long time off exercise, you may want to start more towards the easier to medium, moderate end of the scale. Then you can work your way up to moderate or greater in line with the guidelines. So using RPE can take some practice because it does require you to think a little bit more about how your body's feeling at the time and how much you can push yourself essentially. But it's also a really good tool to track how you're progressing. And so you can make decisions about how many reps or what weight should you choose based on how hard you found that exercise. So the amount of repetitions, or also known as reps, and the weight that you choose often go hand in hand. The heavier the weight, the lower the repetitions, and vice versa, as long as it is a moderate intensity or greater. The other thing to consider in terms of how many reps or what weight you choose to do is what equipment do you have access to? Do you have a gym that has machines? Do you have dumbbells or resistance bands at home? Or do you have just your own body weight to work with? This will often determine what your rep and weight selection are. The cool thing is though that you can increase your strength and your muscle size, by performing one repetition all the way up to 30 repetition, so long as that intensity is moderate or greater. So a good starting point is between 2 to 3 rounds of 8 to 12 repetitions. So you can repeat the exercise enough times so that you can practice the movement, you can get confident at performing the movement, and so that it's actually challenging enough. However, the recommendations do state that you should at least experience both lower repetitions, so lower than 5 reps, for example, as well as the high repetitions, so 20 plus reps, to increase your capacity over a broad range. So, for example, if we think about that squat example that we talked about earlier, let's say you can easily perform 10 repetitions of a squat. You have a 5 kilo weight at home that you can hold on to while squatting. So because you've added weight, because you've added a load, you can decrease the amount of repetitions you do from 10 to about 3 to 5 repetitions. And that would sit about an RPE 8 because you're adding weight, it's becoming more challenging for you. You perform 3 to 5 repetitions over a long period of time. So eventually the RPE is no longer an RPE 8. It actually drops down to about a 5 or a 6 because your body has adapted to the weight, you've gotten stronger. And so to make the exercise more challenging, you can increase the repetitions that you do. So reps and weight often work hand in hand. So, as I mentioned, the reps and weight is often determined by what equipment you have access to. And there's loads of different options that you can use to make the resistance exercise challenging for you. You can use your own body weight. You can go to a local park that has the machines input into the ground. Some of the machines actually have weights input into the machines as well. So you just need to adjust the knob, which is great because you don't need to pay for a gym membership, might be local to you as well. You can also purchase some weights as well. If you are buying weights from home, I do recommend that you get adjustable ones so that you're not just stuck on the one weight of the dumbbell and you can increase or decrease the load depending on what your capacity is. You can also use resistance bands. So these can be found on our diabetes shop as well. So if you search diabetes shop, go down to exercise equipment, we do stock some resistance bands, or you can visit department stores that stock these resistance bands as well. You can also go to a gym facility as well, where they have essentially all the equipment that I've just listed, machine form, dumbbells, kettlebells, barbells, anything, you name it, they will probably have it. However, if you choose to exercise at home, you can use whatever you have available to you. So back in COVID, they would have recommended you to use cans of food. You can use your detergent, maybe a packet of rice. They often come in 5 kilo increments. What I would recommend is that you pop it into a bag so that you can carry it on your back, or you can hold it quite easily rather than having to hold multiple home appliances at once. So typically when you work out at home, you are limited to how much you can load these exercises, or you may not be comfortable in loading up the exercise in the first place. So here are some different strategies that you can use to adjust the intensity of the exercise so that you can progress, or that you can modify it to what your current capacity is. So number one, increase the range of motion of the exercise. So you can see the lovely lady in the picture here is doing a push-up on an elevated surface. She might get rid of that elevated surface and perform the push-up on the ground, so you have a larger range of motion. Same with the squatting example that we talked about earlier. You might be squatting to a chair or a bench. You can get rid of that chair or that bench so that you're squatting lower, increasing the range of motion. Play around with the speed or the tempo of the exercise. If you perform it faster, it may become harder. So that squat example, instead of doing a squat, you can do a squat jump. Or the opposite end, you can make it a lot slower. So instead of just going through the motions and standing up and down in the squat, you can try and descend for about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So essentially you're doing that exercise for a longer period of time. Similarly to the speed is adding a pause to the exercise. So taking that squat example, if you squat all the way down and you hold that position for a couple of seconds, the exercise will become a lot harder. And lastly, you can modify the exercise from 2 limbs to 1 limb. So if we take that squat example, you can take the exercise from double leg to single leg. So in summary, resistance training should be done on 2 to 3 days of the week, ideally on non-consecutive days, just to give you a bit of a break in between each session. The intensity should be moderate or greater. So if we refer back to the RPE scale, that would be between a 6 and 9 RPE. You want to make sure that the weight is challenging, particularly after you've had a period of adjusting to the movement. So as we mentioned earlier, you might not go straight to that high intensity resistance exercise. You may start off a bit lighter and then work your way up so that it does become challenging for you. If you're starting resistance exercise for the first time, you don't know where to start, begin at 2 to 3 sets for about 8 to 12 repetitions. But remember that the reps can range anywhere between 1 to 30 repetitions based on how hard that exercise is, so the intensity or the load that you have available to you. The other half of the physical activity guidelines includes 150 minutes to 300 minutes of moderate intensity, or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous intensity aerobic exercise per week. So that is the total weekly volume. It sounds like a lot. It does really sound like a lot. That's why early in the presentation, I asked you to think about how much exercise you currently do, because alongside the resistance training guidelines, your current activity levels will often determine how quickly you can reach this recommendation for aerobic exercise, or whether we need to draw back. And you might not be reaching the guidelines just yet, just depending on what your activity levels are currently and what your current fitness levels are. So to recap, aerobic exercise essentially works on the ability of your heart, your lungs, and your blood vessels to all work together to maintain a workload over a long period of time. So your aerobic fitness. You may have heard this being referred to as your cardiorespiratory fitness. So cardio being your heart and your blood vessels, respiratory being your lungs. That's why a lot of aerobic exercise is referred to as cardio. So these are the types of exercises that get your heart beating faster and you breathing a little bit heavier. So some examples would include walking, You can do some dancing, cycling, rowing, swimming, running, essentially anything that you can do over a long period of time. So, what does moderate or vigorous intensity look like in this context? Let's revisit our RPE scale. So, it's the same scale as the resistance exercise, so 1 to 10. Easy, medium, and hard in this context similarly mimics resistance exercise in the fact that it determines how much longer you can sustain or complete that activity for. But instead of how many more repetitions can you do, it often relates to how much can you talk during this activity. And therefore, it often determines how fast or the speed of the activity as well. So in this instance, 1 still represents very minimal effort. So being able to do the activity for a very, very long time. On the other end is an RPE 10, and that is equivalent to you sprinting at 100% effort for as long as you can until you can no longer maintain that speed anymore. So an easy way to determine how hard your aerobic exercise is using the talk or sing test. If you're able to sing with no problems while you're doing the aerobic exercise, you're sitting around the easy to medium part of the scale. If you can maintain a conversation, but you need to take a couple breaths in between, that's when you start to approach the moderate intensity. If you can no longer sing, but you can say a couple words in between the activity while you're doing it, you're approaching the moderate to vigorous or high intensity. If you can no longer speak at all, I can guarantee you that is a hard intensity exercise. You may have heard hard intensity being referred to as high intensity interval training or HIIT because you can only do it for a short period of time. You wouldn't be able to maintain that intensity for very long. So, should you be doing moderate or vigorous intensity aerobic exercise? Well, the current research suggests that high intensity aerobic training results in slightly better improvements in terms of your fitness level, your BMR, and your weight management when we compare that to lower intensity aerobic exercise in sedentary individuals, so individuals that aren't active essentially. Though improvements can be seen in both high and low intensity exercise. Because the demand is so high when you do high intensity aerobic exercise, it often mimics the metabolic demand of resistance training. You'd only be able to do the activity for a short duration, as I mentioned earlier. So performing lower intensity aerobic exercise will allow you to perform an activity for longer periods of time. You can almost think of it like getting a bigger tank for your car, a bigger fuel tank for your car. So you're building on the body's ability to work the fuel or use the fuel over a long period of time. On the other hand, high intensity is like getting a turbo engine. So it's more powerful. So the question still stands, should you do high or should you do low intensity aerobic exercise? Well, it really determines on why you're doing the exercise or why you're doing aerobic exercise in the first place. So that's why I got you to think about why is it that you're exercising in the beginning of this presentation. Ultimately, what is the goal of you doing aerobic exercise? A greater aerobic fitness, so that's the cardiorespiratory fitness I was talking about earlier, leads to significant improvement in multiple health conditions. So if you perform high intensity aerobic training, the volume of exercise you need to complete is lower when you compare that to low intensity, meaning that it's often a more time efficient mode of exercise. However, because the demand is so high, because the intensity is so high, it is often very, very difficult to perform. So lower intensity aerobic training may be a really good starting point, particularly if you have no to little history with aerobic training. That's not to say that if you do cardio often that you shouldn't do any low intensity. It's still a good option for you. Essentially, low intensity aerobic training gives you a base to be able to tolerate high intensity aerobic exercise later on. So from a health perspective, it doesn't really matter what intensity you choose to do as long as the exercise gets done. There are benefits to both, particularly when you are considering performance outcomes rather than health outcomes, but choose the one that you're most likely going to do most of the time, or do both if you can't choose. There is also no specific rules regarding the way that you split up the aerobic exercise. So remembering, we want to accumulate 150 to 300 minutes or 75 to 150 minutes, depending on what the intensity of the exercise is. So one day you might do 15 minutes of a high intensity aerobic exercise, and then you might go for a 30-minute walk the following day. You might decide that one day you're doing 30 minutes of aerobic exercise and you choose, I'll do 10 minutes of cycling, 10 minutes of rowing, and then 10 minutes on the treadmill, for example. So all equates to 30 minutes for that day. Research actually suggests that as little as 1 minute can lead to health improvements. So a good starting point here would be about 5 to 10 minute intervals of moderate intensities on days of the week. Particularly if you don't do any aerobic training currently. Or you may choose to do 30 minutes continuously. As I mentioned, as long as the weekly volume accumulates close to or in line with the guidelines. So, if you experience time restraints where you're unable to perform resistance training and aerobic training on different days, so if you remember back to the resistance exercise, we recommended non-consecutive days, whereas aerobic exercise should be done on most days of the week. It's recommended that you complete your resistance exercise first prior to your aerobic. It's often harder to push for, I guess, maximum strength or trying to build your muscle after you've done your cardio. It also may help with your blood glucose management as well. As I mentioned, because resistance training and the high intensity aerobic training, the demand is so high, the body often relies on sugar that's already circulating in the blood, as well as the sugar that's already stored in your muscles and your tissues and your liver. So that may actually result in an increase in your blood sugar levels immediately after exercise when we compare that to low to moderate aerobic training, which may lower your blood sugar levels immediately after. Regardless of the exercise type or intensity, within a 24-hour window, we start to see a gradual decrease in your blood sugar levels because of the increased insulin sensitivity that we mentioned earlier in the presentation. Your muscles and your tissues are starting to take up more of that sugar because of the increased insulin sensitivity. It's storing some of that sugar into the tissues, and your BMR is increased as well. So all the processes that your body does in the background, it's using more of that energy at rest. So exercise will therefore result in changes to your blood sugar level. That's to be expected, whether you live with diabetes or whether you don't. For those who live with diabetes, it's important that we keep it safe enough for you to exercise. So we want to make sure that your blood sugar levels are greater than 5 millimoles per liter and no greater than 14 millimoles per liter. If you've had a history or you currently experience blood sugar levels which are difficult to control, so they're uncontrolled, we do recommend that you seek medical clearance prior to commencing an exercise program. If you've had a hypo or experienced hypoglycemia within the last 24 hours, so this is defined as blood sugar levels lower than 4 millimoles per liter, you want to avoid exercise temporarily. You want to make sure that you have fast-acting carbohydrates with you when you exercise, just in case your blood sugar levels do start to drop too low. Something that contains at least 15 grams of carbohydrates. You want to also consider your meal timing and when you're taking your medication, particularly if you are on insulin. As we mentioned, exercise has that blood sugar lowering effect. Combine that with your medication, you actually you start to compound that blood sugar effect, which can cause your blood sugar to drop a bit lower than we'd like. You want to consider other medical conditions or injuries as well that may be impacted as a result of exercise. So as you embark on your exercise journey, or as you start to continue regularly exercising, your body will start to adapt to the work that you're putting it through, essentially, which means you'll need to progress your program to match your new fitness level. You can do this through a number of different ways. The first way, you can increase the volume of your program. So this could be the number of sets, the number of repetitions that you do, or the duration of that exercise. You can increase the amount of weight you're using. You can increase the intensity, or you can modify the exercise. You will find that your long-term engagement in a program doesn't really change drastically unless you're looking to try something new. Most of the time, it'll be small tweaks in terms of the sets, the reps, the duration that you will do to match your new fitness level at that point in time. So on that note, it's important to remember that your progress often isn't going to be linear. It's really common to find yourself doing less reps or lifting a lighter weight or feeling really exhausted running the same distance that you ran last week, for example, because it's not only your physical state that influences your ability to perform the exercise, but also your sleep levels. Were you stressed that day? How much have you had to eat beforehand? So don't be discouraged by small setbacks because life happens sometimes. So being adaptable is, I think, a really key important to engaging in exercise long term, and it allows you to continue your momentum, continue your exercise habit so that you don't just let go of the progress that you've done so far, but continue and modify, work around the barriers that might pop up. One other thing to note is that when you introduce a new stimulus to the body, whether that is an increase in intensity, you do more volume, you want to try out a new exercise, your body needs time to adjust and you'll probably experience something called DOMS. So DOMS refers to delayed onset muscle soreness. So throughout your training career, you'll experience varying degrees of DOMS, meaning you won't always be sore, but sometimes you will. DOMS is often more pronounced when you are doing resistance exercise, but you don't need to be alarmed if you experience DOMS, as it often goes away with time. So dealing with DOMS, movement often helps, even though it doesn't feel like it at the time. I don't know if you've ever done a gym class, for example, or you've done a hike that you've never done and your body feels absolutely wrecked and you don't want to move it at all. Sometimes doing a little bit of stretching, light aerobic exercise often helps with managing your DOMS. But this doesn't necessarily mean you need to wait until your DOMS has completely recovered to continue exercising. It's really common for DOMS to persist up to 72 hours post-exercise, and it's usually the second day, so not even immediately after, it's the second day where you feel it the most. So if your DOMS persist over an extended period of time, I'm talking more than a couple days or weeks, for example, then you may need to review your current exercise program and pull back the volume or maybe the intensity temporarily until you feel like you can manage or you can recover, deal with the fatigue in time so that you can perform the next exercise session, for example. The same principle applies if you're trying to work around any pains or niggles. So pulling back the volume, pulling back the intensity, changing up the exercise so we can work around that barrier rather than avoiding exercise completely. So as you move along your exercise program, you'll often experience times where you don't feel like exercising at all. So here are some ways to keep moving or increase your likelihood at regularly engaging in your exercise program. First thing is to write down your exercise plan. If you have a pen and paper, even better, you remember it a bit better. If you prefer apps on your phone, that's completely fine as well. But this often takes away the decision fatigue on the day where you're saying, okay, I need to exercise today. What am I going to do? You can refer back to your plan to know exactly what you're doing. If you don't want to think about creating your own exercise plan, seek support from an exercise physiologist like myself. So the whole purpose of an EP, their entire job is to prescribe exercise to improve your health based on what your current fitness levels are and what your current physical activity levels are. So you can just focus on getting the activity done. They're also a point of accountability too. Otherwise, you can tell a partner, you can tell a friend, you can tell a coach about what you're planning to do, what your exercise plans are. On top of this, you want to have a time to check in and reflect on what progress have you made so far. Is there anything I need to change so that I'm enjoying it a bit more, or I can manage the fatigue, or so I can progress my program? Checking in and reflecting back is quite important. On the days where you feel like not exercising at all, distracting yourself from the exercise. So listening to music, a podcast, or an audiobook. Sometimes I like to chuck on a YouTube video if I'm walking on the treadmill, for example. So by the time the YouTube video is done, I've done my 30 minutes of exercise and I didn't even think about it. And I think the most important point, and a point that is very overlooked, is have fun. Do something you enjoy. This might involve trying something new, but you want to relate it to why you are exercising or why you are engaging in exercise in the first place, which is what we started off today's presentation with. Why do you move? We explored how having a good understanding of your goal and your purpose of the exercise program can not only help you make decisions in your program, but keep you moving on days that you don't want to. So, to summarize everything that we've talked about so far, something is better than nothing. So you're still going to improve your health doing suboptimal or not doing exercise according to the plan, but getting as close to the guidelines as possible is the key here. So remember, that's 150 to 300 minutes of moderate aerobic exercise, or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous aerobic exercise, as well as 2 to 3 days of resistance exercise. Allow for flexibility within your exercise program. So that way you can let life happen and your program and your progress can still continue. This can be achieved by having a weekly or maybe a monthly volume goal rather than having a set in stone routine. Although routine works for some people, do allow for some flexibility. And lastly, exercise is one of the tools you can use to assist in the management of your diabetes. But most importantly, it's going to improve your overall health, well-being, and your longevity. So that brings us to the end of our presentation on moving towards better health with exercise. So thank you so much for listening. I'm going to pull up the Q&A or have a quick look if there are any questions at all. If not, as Erin mentioned, you can email the United membership email if you want to look back on the presentation, you want to sit with the information for a little bit, digest it, and then you have a question, feel free to reach out to us afterwards.
Great, thanks, Isabel.
No worries.
Yeah, as I said earlier, and as you relayed there, people can send an email whenever they want after they've had some time to look over the recording and remember what was said today. You can also add create a discussion on the online forum, Diabetes Connect, or go in and read what other people have written and contribute to an existing discussion about exercise. And we have HPs looking in on there. There's Beck, who's a dietitian and health coach, and she can pass information on to the internal HPs as well, who can answer more exercise related questions. And you can also call the 1-800-177-055, as always, to speak or to request a call back, usually from a exercise physiologist, educator, or a dietitian. I'll just put in here a reminder. I'll add it to the Q&A and the chat as well. I'll also send the survey and this link to all attendees today via email as well, in case you can't see. In case you can't see what I'm typing, I'm just putting in an event that's happening, the next Health Hour event, which is happening tomorrow, with Beck and with Ange as well. That's how to get back on track is this fortnight's topic. So you can go in and register. It's between 3:30 and 4:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time tomorrow, Arvo, if you wanted to register, and those ones are all recorded as well, same as these events are. I think that's it for today. If you have any, as with all our events, if you have any feedback or suggestions for future speakers or topics, you can send us an email, or you can add the suggestions to Diabetes Connect, or give us a call on that 1-800 number as well.